There's almost an arrogance to your markets where a lot of the technology innovation have known to come from, right? If you look at what big tech firms are doing, there's a big reason why they are probably the primary companies that are sponsoring visas because they understand that top talent is international.
Street seniority like a price later, junior cheap, mid-level middle, senior expensive. The letter is real. So today we are going to walk you through about some questions that we hear almost all the weeks about how the seniority costs and how to define the prices. So first, Darius, is a senior engineer always more expensive than two mid levels?
So always is like the dead giveaway word here, right? Usually it's more nuanced. The answer when you hear that, I think it depends, right? When you have decisions that need to be made that are architectural, no, a senior is not going to be more expensive. In actuality, they provide you with higher ROI. So expensive in the sense of cash out the door for their salary, yes, but they also help you to progress further down your product roadmap or your ability to deploy AI products, right? If the problem though is well defined, right, and you already have senior leadership, it's easier to have two mid-level people, especially if it's the type of problem that can be divided up, right? Not all problems can be divided up. And this is actually an interesting thing that we run into when people want to move faster in their AI development journey or producing products, right? They're like, we'll just hire more people. Not all problems can be solved by hiring more people, right? Sometimes there are problems that actually can't be divided. They're not parallel processes that can be run. So in that case, if you did hire two mid-level people on a project that you really could only have one person working on that project, then it does become more costly.
So, what does seniority actually buy you in AI, especially?
When you need to make architectural decisions, it's the senior person who's able to use previous experience and determine, you know, because these architectural decisions have implications over the long term, right? And so there are a bunch of different routes that you can go. We talk a lot about harnesses and how harnesses and how model selection is important for AI, but the harness surrounding the actual model can be even more important as it relates to the efficacy or the ability for a AI solution to work at a very efficient or very effective level. Someone who is more senior is going to have more insight into how architecture is actually important. The other thing that seniority buys you is proximity to the problem. So senior people generally have more experience with business. And given that AI is differentiated from software in that it allows for more personalization, more customization, which means you need to understand at a deeper level the business problem. And more senior people are generally going to have that level of experience. And that's why you see, especially in this space, if you're talking about B2B products, especially people who are more senior in their career tend to be more successful founders, right? Because they understand the business problem better. So coming back to how that benefits from the senior level perspective, being able to create an AI solution that solves a specific problem, you're going to be in a better place. And then the last thing here is just thinking through cost trade offs, right? Maybe or perhaps at a more junior level, someone knows how to use LLM. They understand that there's a cost associated to using LLMs and using AI, but they don't necessarily understand the trade off between using one model or another or token spend and the implications that has on a P&L, right? Someone who's more senior, P&L, profit and loss statement. Someone who's more senior has a more strategic view of the impact of operations on the ultimate goal of a business, which is generating profit at some point. But that's why it's important to have those senior people, whether one of the founders is technical or whether you bring in someone who is senior in their career, if you can afford that. Oh, let me add one more thing. We talked about trade offs, and the value that a senior person really has is to be opinionated. So, at a more junior level, you don't have as much perspective of things that work and things that do not work. Someone who's more senior, especially in this space in AI, will be able to push back on certain decisions, right? Whether that be taking the accuracy of an AI model from 95% to 98%, right? What does that actually mean? If you make the decision to do that 95 to 98, is it worth it? Right? A senior person could push back. There's a ton of decisions that they can make, but that's the value you get. And that person should, in theory, be able to help you to avoid many costly mistakes.
So, having a account those abilities that a seniority level must have, where should my first AI hire sit on the seniority
It
curve?
depends on what exists on the team. If you've already got leadership that is senior, then perhaps you don't need to hire another senior. In fact, hiring someone full time that is senior, you need to have enough interesting work for them to do, right? If you go out, hire someone who is senior, 10 years of experience, being extreme here, in building and deploying AI systems, and you have them doing junior level work, they're not going to be satisfied with the job, no matter how much you're paying, right? So you want to have enough interesting work. And if this is a startup, like I think generally people understand that with startups, you have to be a little bit more flexible. You're wearing all hats, right? But you don't want to lose senior people because that it was expensive to hire them. To let them go means you got to go out and hire someone else, and you lose a lot of IP when they walk out the door. So that's something to consider. One thing that most founders do not consider when hiring is, well, if you want someone senior, you could actually hire that person on a fractional basis. So you get the benefit of their intelligence, their experience, without the risk of having someone full time that just don't have enough interesting work for them to be doing. On the other side, I'll give you another thing people don't think about is, and this is coming back to thinking about hiring in Latin America, you could hire two mid-level people to try to solve a problem that are domestic, right? That are North American, or you can find someone in Latin America that's senior, right? That same senior person is going to depend. Again, we had this conversation about like what decisions need to be made. That same senior person can help your firm strategy, your company strategy advance faster, right? It doesn't matter where they live. Talent capability is global now, right? It doesn't only exist in one place. So if you can find someone senior at a lower cost to the company, but the same skill level and pay the same as you would with two mid-level people. No, I should say probably one mid-level person domestic, right? It just makes more sense to go the other route. But I don't think a lot of people think about it in that way in terms of how they staff up their team.
So, keep talking about the cost. How does seniority change the cost of betting?
I think when it comes to vetting, it kind of goes back to standard management practices. For someone who's more junior, you can ask more technical questions. You can ask about the different tools they use and the, amount of projects they've had with that particular tool and get a sense for their experience with tools or different frameworks, right? They are ultimately making a lot of the strategic decisions. And so that's the line of questioning that you would have for someone who's more junior. Someone who's more senior, your line of questioning is going to be more strategic, right? You're going to ask more about trade offs. You're going to ask more about how the type of people they think would actually fit inside of a specific architecture, right? Because they're going to be managing people. So with that being the case, who they need to know who would be best for a particular job. So I would add to this with someone who's more senior, you pay even more attention to their communication ability and their communication style because at that point now they need to be able to push back when necessary. They need to be able to help whether it's the founders or whether it's even investors who they may be communicating with. Why? certain decisions were made the way they were made. And so doing that in a low friction way, it actually ends up being very important. And it's more of a cultural thing, it's more of a soft skills thing. But at that level, the question isn't about technical ability. At that level, the question is about how do you manage, how do you think through strategy, how do you get your point across, and how do you take very complex technical jargon and turn it into speak that someone who may be slightly technical can understand, right? I think that becomes a very important quality.
And I think we already explained a little bit about this. So, what does the Latin seniority curve looks like compared to the US onshore?
It looks the same. Well, so I say it that way because there's almost an arrogance to your markets where a lot of the technology innovation have known to come from, right? So just thinking primarily Silicon Valley, right? If you look at what big tech firms are doing, there's a big reason why they are probably the primary companies that are sponsoring visas because they understand that top talent is international, especially in a world like AI where most of the talented people didn't necessarily learn their craft inside of some prestigious institution. They probably were learning on their own. In fact, a great question to always ask is what do you do? How do you keep up on the latest in AI? Because this is a constantly changing environment. So, what are the things you're doing to try to stay up and stay current? In this environment where we're seeing new technology coming out all the time. If you got somebody who's, oh, I don't know, I don't read any new research papers, I'm not testing out anything on my own, it's like, well, if that's the case, how quickly is your tech outdated or your team's knowledge? So I say all that to say talent is global. And especially in Latin America, which has historically been somewhere where people haven't looked for talent, but you've got, well, a little secret of big tech is that they are also building offices out here. In fact, let me just spoil it all, right? A lot of the hiring changes have shifted from hiring domestic to building nearshore offices, right? It's not something that it would be taboo to say it in the media. There's no reason to make that announcement. But that's what's happening, right? But that's because, especially in the world of AI, the way people have learned, it's not based on going to a particular institution. Not everyone needed to go to Stanford or MIT to learn. You can sit right in front of your laptop and you can get a bunch of reps in, a bunch of projects in, and become really good at what you do. And so, back to the question about seniority curve. Well, it looks exactly the same, right? And in fact, what you start to see now is because AI is interesting globally, the numbers in terms of quantity, right? That's probably the difference. How many people from a quantity perspective do you have in the more mature markets versus Latin America? Historically, that's been different, but now you've got a lot more people who are now gaining more experience, especially as you have more unicorns being built natively out of Latin America.
So the question is not senior or junior. The question is, what does my next hire need to decide and who is qualified to decide? If you are working through that questions for your team right now, feel free to contact us or drop in the comments and we are here to help you.